British historian Alexandra Churchill is no relation to the former Prime Minister. However, her new book is the history of the world at war 1914. Title, Ring of Fire. Alex Churchill is quick to tell you she is not an academic, but has a research master's degree in the Battle of the Somme. She's a self-starter who writes 3 times a week for Substack, co-hosts a podcast titled History Hack, appears on many documentaries, and is a participant in a history touring company in Great Britain. Her book is the story of ordinary people, she says, not those stalking the corridors of power. Alex Churchill, go back to the beginning. When was history important to you in your life?
I think I don't remember how old I was. I was really little, but my mum went into hospital to have my brother, and my grandfather, who was a history buff, he shut me up and got some peace and quiet by giving me Waterlords, A Night to Remember, to flick through. And I practiced my handwriting for a few days by copying out the first class passenger list from the Titanic. So it goes way, way back. Most of the early stuff was ship related. It was the Mary Rose or it was Titanic. And then I've gradually gravitated more towards air stuff, and then just fully fledged into the First World War and haven't looked back, really.
Where did you grow up?
Southwest London, so not far from Wimbledon where they have the tennis. So just a suburban sort of middle-class town, really ordinary, really. My mum was a cleaner, my dad was a computer programmer. No, but apart from my grandfather having an interest in history, and a few, I think, tall tales of the Second World War, because he was only a boy. I don't think anything that kind of steered me towards writing or anything like that. Like, I was the first person in my family to go to college or university. So yeah, I'm a bit of an outlier.
Where did you go to university, and then where did you get your master's degree? So
I actually bypassed doing an undergraduate degree because I had to go and work. So I did. So I did some undergraduate study through Oxford University, but then went back actually only during lockdown to Leeds University and applied for a master's. I don't know how it is in the US, but you can apply with the equivalent experience. And by then I had enough history work behind me to justify parachuting in, if you like, straight to doing a master's in history at Leeds. So that was a lockdown project, really. So I did, I caught up on my education after having been a historian for quite a long while. I do everything back to front. It's a me thing. But I did my master's in self-inflicted wounds on the Battle of the Somme. So.
What was the Battle of the Somme? I know you've talked about it until you're blue in the face, but just give us a brief background on it.
So if you're British, this is the seminal battle this is our World War I Battle of the Bulge, if you like. It's the one that everybody knows the grim stories of it, and it kind of epitomizes the First World War for us. So everybody will know that word in nigh on every British household. So the key thing about the Battle of the Somme is that the opening day is still the worst day casualty-wise in the history of the British Army. So I think I located by accident kind of a hospital admissions book, which it happened to be for a unit where they routed everybody who was suspected of having a self-inflicted wound. And it was genius. It was brilliant to find, because it had their names, their ages, what wound they had that had led the authorities to be suspicious of them, how long they'd been in the army, and then also how long that they'd been in theatre. So my master's thesis is, I did a master's of research, which means instead of a small thesis and lots of classes, it was all thesis. So it was a 30,000 word statistical analysis of these 800 guys who were suspected of having maimed themselves to get out of fighting.
At the Battle of the Somme, how many people were there? And besides the British, who and the Germans, anybody else?
The French are there as well. The original plan was to have for it to be this big joint offensive between the French and the British, and the French actually dictated where it would be fought, which I don't think the British would have picked the Somme, which is in Picardy, as a place to fight a battle. It had very little infrastructure. It's agricultural land, but the French wanted to keep an eye on the British because they were always obsessed with this idea that the Britain weren't pulling their weight, and they thought, well, if we do it next door to each other in our backyard, then we know that it will be like truly joint. But then the Germans initiate the Battle of Verdun in February 1916. And so what you have is the French army being battered there. So you have the paring back of the French contribution, but they're very much still a part of the Battle of the Somme as well. And you're talking about hundreds of thousands of guys on each side.
Your book, Ring of Fire, as an American, this is not criticism of you, but as an American, I saw very little about the United States in the book. Explain why.
So we very much, when we embarked on this, and my co-author Nikolai is Danish, with an express interest in the Eastern Front and the Balkans. We have the complete polar opposite interests. He doesn't do anything desert related or African theatres, and I don't do any of his stuff. So actually, when you mash this together, you get a really good overview. But we decided that this book would very much be nation blind. So it covers 8 weeks at the beginning of the war, or a bit more. It covers till the sort of mid-September. And if you take any nation, they have their proportionate content in the book relative to how involved in the war they are at that time. So in terms of America, obviously America won't enter the war until 1917. But I think what America lends the book, and the stuff that we did include, is some really great content about neutrals and the reality of neutrality in the First World War, which is that it doesn't really exist.
Among other things, I got to know you on YouTube. And anybody that's listening to this, if they want to get more of Alex Churchill, not related to Winston Churchill, you can find lots of stuff on YouTube. Just talk us through, how did you get on YouTube? How'd that work?
So I did my first TV appearance back in 2009, and I actually came on board as a researcher, and it was because there was a BBC history program called Time Watch, and it was kind of an institution, much like Booknotes in the US. And there was an episode being made specifically about the air war in 1918, and it was focusing in on 2 pilots, and one of them I had done quite a lot of work on. And someone at the RAF museum spoke to the director and said, I think you should get in touch with this girl. She has mined to the bottom of everything involving James McCudden, and you should talk to her. So I kind of gave the production team a lead on where to look and what aspects of the story, and make sure they weren't missing anything. And then the director went to the BBC and said, I think we should put her on camera. She's young. She doesn't have a university affiliation, which at the time was a huge deal for the BBC to float something without that. And they said to him, well, film her and we'll see. So I did. And I look at it now and it's horrible. But I did some footage for that. And that was my first thing. And then I think there were a few air related projects that came up over the next few years. And then I'd expanded my repertoire and started looking at the ground war as well. But I very much came into the First World War through the air.
How did you get interested in World War I, and how much of your life is spent around that war?
So I think because my first love and the first thing I was obsessed with was the Titanic, that's obviously very close date-wise to the First World War. And I think the thing about researching the Titanic and being interested in that is it's only one ship, and it's only a couple of thousand people, and it's very crowded in terms of historians and research. And I thought, I'm just going to give myself a break and move into something where there's more space to breathe and everything's not such a competition. So I started looking at people who had been on Titanic and what they may have done or not done in the First World War. And from then I got interested in pilots, and that was it.
I don't know if you can do this, but just so we can continue the discussion about your book and all, give me 5 quick things. It can be 4, it can be 6, but 5 quick things about World War I that people should know.
I think that immediately and straight away, it was a global conflict. I think it's a mistake to only look at one or two countries or just the war in the West and not acknowledge that actually the scale was often bigger elsewhere. I think, as I mentioned, I think neutrality is so interesting. And I didn't think I would be so interested in this when we started writing Ring of Fire. Neutrality is an impossibility by 1914. That's another takeaway. I think as well, the fact that the war is so much more than just the combatants as well. I think one thing we strive to prove in Ring of Fire is that everybody is impacted by this war in some way, even if it's tangentially. And I think, and we can come back to it, but I'll explain with some Chilean miners how people you would think are so far removed and have nothing to do with the war really do warrant attention as well. I think those are my big three.
In the beginning, near the beginning of your book, you quote the American ambassador to Great Britain, Walter Page, who was a journalist and worked at the Hearst newspapers here. I'm going to read you just what you put in the book. He says, I walked out in the night a while ago. The stars are bright. The night is silent. The country quiet. Millions of men are in camp and on warships. Will they all have to fight and many of them die to untangle this network of treaties and alliances and to blow off huge debts with gunpowder so that the world may start again? Why did you pick that?
It's a breathtaking quote, isn't it? I thought it was breathtaking and so evocative as well. And it really highlighted, because another thing, so we tried to write a book. We grew up reading Guns of August, and that's very much a top-down view of the war. It looks at great men in important rooms making big decisions, and we wanted to write the opposite. We wanted to write from the bottom up, ordinary people, which means that we got to parachute in without discussing the July crisis. We literally start with mobilization. And I think maybe that's another huge key takeaway from the book, is that we have now a very definite impression of, this is the date that America entered the war, this is the date that Germany declared war on Russia, this is and we know when these things happened. At the time, it was this sheer chaos, and mobilization didn't necessarily mean that you were going to war. So there was all this uncertainty, and I think Page's quote really summed up that whole idea of hanging over the edge and not knowing where people would end up and not knowing what would happen. And that's very much how we wanted to write. We wanted people to be in the moment and not know with hindsight what was going to happen. We wanted to capture how they felt at a given time without knowing how it would end. And I thought that quote was perfect as a jumping off point for the book.
Actually, he worked for a lot of publications. I'm not sure it was for Hearst, but you have a Hearst quote in here that seems to be very American, and I want to read it and explain this one. This comes from the New York American newspaper, and it's a story, and it says, action should be the watchword and the duty of the American Congress and the American people in this great commercial emergency. $2 billion in trade is the prize which world conditions have put before the American people. Europe's tragic extremity becomes, without any working of our own, America's golden opportunity, not of a lifetime, but of a century of national life. What's the point?
I think the point is, I think I've said it a couple of times already, I don't think neutrality exists. I think the world has shrunk by 1914 because of global trade and because of the nature of warfare. Nobody can conduct a war in isolation without things from outside. And I think the key thing for America is producing arms and munitions and equipment for a war. And that's what they're talking about when they're saying about the 2 billion in trade. They're talking about all the things that these European countries will need to wage a war, and how really America would be negligent if she was not involving herself in that piece of the pie which exists. And it sounds callous, and I think Europeans reading that would have been alarmed by how almost gleeful it maybe sounds about the commercial opportunities. But this is what I mean when I say there's no such thing as neutrality, is that when you break it down, America is going to produce that equipment and America wants to sell that equipment. But because of the way the world works and because of Britain's domination of the seas, America only has one market to sell it to. There are no German ships plying the oceans because they're all in port and they're terrified to come out because of the Royal Navy and because of the Allied sea supremacy. So America can only sell to one side. So that's where America fails, really, by traditional standards of neutrality, where America fails to remain neutral. And actually, there was a really interesting take on it from the president, where he said, like, we need to make sure that they don't do this. And he tries to have it like outlawed, but he can't do it. He can't, because the reality is you can't tell people they can't have that piece of the pie.
I have to admit that the most fascinating thing I've heard from you, and I watched it on YouTube, is this whole thing you do on neutrality. So let's dig into that and explain how you see the issue and all the different countries that call themselves neutral.
So if we look at neutrality as a concept in further back, so say we look at the 100 Days campaign in Waterloo, it's easy to remain neutral. If you're American, that is one campaign happening in a very concentrated area between very definitive forces, and they don't need anything from outside, from you, to participate. So America can say, okay, hands off, that is nothing to do with us, we have nothing to do with it. I talked about global trade. So one of the examples I use when I give talks is Sweden. So Sweden's major export is iron ore when 1914 comes around. And Sweden cannot afford to be stringent about it and say, okay, well, we just won't sell it to anybody, because that is going to be a product that is going to be used to wage war. So as neutrals, hands off, we won't sell it. That's not realistic, because Sweden's economy has to continue to function. So Sweden will sell that iron ore. So is that iron ore in its raw form? Are they okay doing that because it's not yet a weapon? Or is the knowledge that and Sweden are most likely going to sell to Germany, is the knowledge that is going to go to make weapons, is that where the line is? So Sweden are over the line. So everybody is having to rethink where the line is and what defines neutrality. So I kind of play a game sometimes with people where I say, well, you tell me a country that you think is neutral in August 1914, and I'll tell you something they did that's naughty. So for instance, I'm looking at Italy and Turkey. So both of those know eventually what side they will join. For Turkey, they'll join the Central Powers in November 1914, and they are always going to be on the side of Germany. It's not realistic for Turkey to pick the other side. And the same goes for Italy, in that Italy will not side with anyone against Britain because of Britain's domination at sea and the Mediterranean, and Italy's need to use the Mediterranean. And also because Italy gets most of her coal from Britain. If Britain cuts off that supply, Italian railways cease to function, Italian homes can't be heated, Italian factories can't work. So Italy is always going to pick that one side. So Italy, for instance, their existing war plan, because mostly what Ring of Fire is about how everybody engages their initial war plans in August 1914, and they fail to end the war as planned. So Italy's plan was defensive, and it was aimed at protecting Italy from a potential incursion across the border from Austria-Hungary. By the 21st of August 1914, Italy has reshaped their war plans to make them offensive and aimed at invading Austria-Hungary. So Italy officially is neutral till May 1915, but that's August 1914. They've already decided who they will attack and how they will attack them. Neutral countries as well. So Switzerland, the most neutral of countries you can possibly think of, mobilizes 250,000 men in August 1914. That's like double what Britain mobilizes, and Britain does go straight to war. And it's all aimed, like I said, mobilization doesn't mean you will end up going to war, but they'd be negligent if they didn't do that. because they have to be prepared in case war does come across the border at them as well. So it is quite a fun game to play, picking out different neutral countries and trying to find out something they did wrong. And I think Holland, of all countries, the Netherlands really tries, and they're in a bind because of their geographic location. The chances are, if Germany are going through Belgium to get into France, the war is on their doorstep, and they try so hard to have nothing to do with it. They restrict newspapers, people's personal freedoms get taken away in terms of wireless sets and things like that, so that they can't threaten the Netherlands' neutral position. And yet there's still evidence to suggest that the Germans, I wouldn't say invaded the Netherlands, but that they took a shortcut through Limburg on their way into Belgium and got away with it. So, yeah, it's very hard to find a neutral country that has no impact in August 1914. I mentioned, so maybe you think, well, South America, that's miles away from everything. Maybe they had nothing to do with any of it. Well, those Chilean miners I mentioned are in a place called Iquique, and their job is to mine nitrates, and and most of their product goes to Germany, because I didn't know this before I wrote this book, but Germany's soil is not necessarily the most fertile, so fertilizers are a big deal for Germany. Well, because of Allied domination of the seas, none of those fertilizers can get across the ocean. So suddenly you have thousands of Chilean miners sleeping on docks, waiting for ships to come and get them to transfer them somewhere else so they can try and find work again. You have there's a town called Rosario in Argentina. They had 3,000 unemployed people in 1914 before the war started, and within 3 weeks they had 33,000 unemployed people. So whole countries are breaking down. I mean, there's a quote in the book, I think, as well, from a German on a dock in Peru, just watching things rot because there's no ships to take them where they need to go and global trade breaks down, that says, I just watched half a century of work go up in smoke.
Please excuse us for interrupting. We'll continue our conversation in a minute. How many times have you been asked if you're a relative of Winston Churchill?
I would say 3 or 4 a week for about the last 10 years. And I haven't helped myself. So there was an angry lady on the internet some years ago who it turned out was a founder member of the Joseph Stalin fan club. And she gave me quite a lot of abuse, and she kept referring to him as my grandfather. And so for a while afterwards, I did refer to him as granddaddy. And a few people didn't get the irony. So I have made a rod for my own back. The connection is very, very, very distant. The two families sever off, I think, about 10 years before the Duke of Marlborough. And then his side of the family got very rich and influential. And my side of the family were their servants.
So give us the story of Alex's whole world. I mean, you've got all these things. I mean, I've been a part of all of them, including your Substack. How do you make money as a historian? Explain that.
I think by endless hustling. And it's kind of the way I want to do it. I don't see myself, and I've said it before, academia is just not for me. And that's not a criticism. Some of my best friends are in academia, and that's what they do, and they're great at it. But it's not for me. I do have a tour company as well, so I take about half a dozen tours out a year. So and I mix them up. So next year we're doing an in-depth casino tour. We're doing Normandy. We're doing the Somme, and I get to go back to Jordan, which I'm thrilled about because it's opening up again after obviously the last couple of years have been a bit hairy with regards to travel to the Middle East. So I combine that with my Substack, which was a revelation for me because it gave me a baseline of income, my Substack, that meant that kind of the rent was paid and I was safe financially, which means that I get to pick and choose the other things that I do, which includes TV work. So I have a really exciting maybe TV thing happening at the moment that fingers crossed will one day be something. And I founded a charity in lockdown as well. And podcasting. I do like podcasting. I have a new short form podcast called the 15-Minute Book Club, where it's kind of like a game show format. So an author will come on and they've got 15 minutes basically to convince everybody to buy their book, which we thought might be fun for authors who have done a lot more of like kind of like these hour-long interviews. It might be something like punchier for people. And the format idea is kind of, it would be like, when you have just making a coffee and you want to listen for something for a short amount of time, as opposed to settling down with a long form podcast. So we hope people are going to enjoy that too.
Explain how Substack works, and can Americans get to your Substack?
They can, yeah. So Substack really did start in America, and actually when I started mine in March last year, and I had to explain to every British person what Substack was because they didn't know. It's gaining traction here now, but I think definitely it's bigger in America. And it's kind of like, 20 years ago, if you wanted to entertain all your favorite interests, you may have gone into a store and bought a photography magazine and a military history magazine and a film magazine, and then you would have read about all your favorite things. Substack enables you to do that online. So there are multitudes of different authors writing about all different things, all different specialities. So one of the ones I subscribe to is the Department of Salad, which is massive. And it's just a lady who does really interesting salad recipes and makes salad interesting. So you would pick and choose, and some are paid. So for instance, for mine, you pay, I think it's about 60 cents an article. So you get 2 articles a week. So you might pay for mine, but only have the occasional free post from someone else. So you basically get to curate your own online reading environment. So possibly the biggest person on the whole of Substack is Heather Cox Richardson, who I think was the first author to be making $1 million a year on Substack. And she does her, I think is it called Letters from an American? But it was founded to sort of transpose. I think she's originally a Civil War historian, but she talks about modern politics now. So you basically get to pick and choose your news, which I think is becoming an ever more appealing way of consuming information and news, and people kind of can create their own little bubble, which I thought was great.
I saw on the homepage of your Substack that you have 4,000 people that subscribe. Yeah. And growing. Is it bigger than that now?
That's about what it is at the moment. So it's kind of a hard environment out there for anybody that does anything subscription wise at the moment, I think, because people are contracting in because everything's become subscription based, hasn't it? Your television, your news, everything. And people are kind of looking where to tighten their belt. So, but it's holding steady. So yeah, I have about 4,000 subscribers, or just over 4,000, and like one in 15 choose to pay to read everything that I do on there, and the others kind of, they get sort of one or 2 posts a month for free. So yeah, I really enjoy doing it. And I think the other authors that I've spoken to that are doing it as well are just loving the freedom of it. So instead of sitting down to write an entire book, like I get to indulge just wanting to say one day something about the French perspective of Waterloo, like I did earlier this week. And then next week, I'm going to be writing about a prisoner of war camp and World War II in the Philippines. So it's great that you just get to jump around and dip in and things. I don't think there was really that kind of environment where you could do it that often and make a living from it until Substack came along.
I did hear you say that you just as soon stay home with your cat and your books. Is that true?
Yeah, I think you wandered through the back of shot earlier on. Yeah. I do. I think I was one of those people that actually lockdown wasn't crippling and soul destroying for me, because I was surrounded by my war books and was doing a podcast and things. So I think I fared better than some people. But yeah, I definitely do like sitting at home with my books.
So how can people find either your podcast, your Substack, your touring company?
So I think everything has an anchor on my website, which is alexchurchill.co.uk. So from there, you can get to all of the other stuff. So there's a web page for the tours. There's also a link to the Substack, a link to the podcast, and some contact information as well. If anybody wants to chat, like I try not to ignore emails from strangers who just want to say hi and chat about history, or ask questions about their family and the war or something I've talked about. But I'm also quite comfortable as well being able to say, like, I don't know, like there was a lovely man that contacted me once. I did something called War Factories, which was really successful, but we had a lot of support from a research team for that, because not all of us were really intrinsically invested in war industry and every aspect of the Second World War in an industry. And this poor gentleman thought he'd found his soulmate when I did an episode about the Mitsubishi Zero, and he had lots of questions about engines, and I did just have to say, I'm really sorry, I don't know.
What's the Great War Group?
So I founded a charity in lockdown as well. I kept myself busy when I was sitting at home with the cat. But I think it's an interest group for anybody who's interested in the First World War and interested in looking at the First World War from its global perspective, like we've been talking about today. And it's actually through that I met Nikolai, who's my co-author and a really good friend now as well. And we have members in 50 odd countries. But what was surprising to us, considering America did not actively participate until 1917, is that our second biggest cache of members is in the USA, and how much passion we've found for the subject with people in America. And I think we have members in about 26 states. And a membership, basically, we produce a magazine. I edit the magazine, and you get 4 of those a year, and we have get-togethers. So we're taking a big group to Verdun next year. Every spring, we like to take people who want to attend to a part of the battlefield where you wouldn't normally go. Like, lots of British people will get in a car and go to the Somme because it's what they know, but they're terrified they don't know what they're looking at when they go to Verdun. So we'll go, okay, well, we'll get a coach and we'll take you out there. So we do that once a year. We have a conference. We have lots of online talks and things like that, and courses, but we also have an online pub, which was another lockdown thing, because in the UK, all of the pubs were shut for several months and you couldn't go out and socialise. So we had one on Zoom where everybody would get together and everyone would have their own supply of drink, and then they would just chat about the war till the early hours. So it's very social, and it's a really friendly community. And as the person that founded it, I was determined that nobody should be afraid to approach it. I said, our mantra is, there is no such thing as a stupid question. There's just a question you don't know the answer to yet. And maybe 15 years ago, I didn't know the answer to that simple sounding question about the First World War. So go ahead and ask it, and someone will give you an answer, and then you'll have a new friend to talk to.
Who are your favorite historians?
Alistair Horn, very much so. On this side of the Atlantic, I very much got into my French history, and that's, I think, what I want to write about next, is France and World War II. I'm talking to a publisher about that at the moment. So he did an excellent book on Verdun. He did an excellent book about the Franco-Prussian War, and my favourite of them is To Lose a Battle, which is about the fall of France in 1940. So British-wise, I would say him. I don't think he's been matched. He wrote prolifically in the 60s. And on your side of the Atlantic, the person that made me want to be a historian was Robert K. Massey. I think I read Nicholas and Alexandra first. And then I more than anything, was blown away by Peter the Great, because it was so immersive. And the subtitle was perfect. It was Peter the Great, His Life and World. That was the version that I had. And he went everywhere. He recreated the Sun King. He recreated Peter the Great in South London, just a few miles from where I'm sitting working in a dockyard. And it really was mind blowing. And then obviously since then I've used Dreadnought as well. And I just thought he was good.
How about YouTube? Is that something that you can do on your own? And does that make money for you?
YouTube, I don't monetize very much at the moment. It's not. I think I chose Substack, so that's where I think there's a danger of doing what I do, of trying to spread yourself too thin, because there is the prospect of money everywhere. When it comes to the podcast, that's probably going to be the biggest YouTube presence that I have, is going to be the 15-minute book club. My co-host, Matt Bone, who's an aviation historian, he's Canadian. He is going to be running the YouTube, and he's very good at the metrics and how to do that. But I think yes, anyone can do it. But I think what I would say is that if you try any of these things, listen to the people who've already done well at it. Listen to what they say. It may all sound like complete gobbledygook in your ears when people talk about metrics and like when to put a social media post up and when to release a YouTube video. Like I think the recommended is don't send anything out to anyone on a Monday morning, because everybody's inboxes are overflowing on a Monday morning. Like when people tell you little snippets like that, listen to them. And network as well. Make friends with people and network, because you'll be able to help them and they'll be able to help you as well. And you can never have enough friends.
By the way, when you do your tours, what's that cost the person that participates in them?
So we are not the cheapest tour company. I said from the very beginning, I didn't want to send you to Monte Cassino cheaper than any other company, and have you on a big coach where I won't run it unless there's 50 people on a bus and you stay in a motel. I didn't want to run that kind of tour. I wanted to run tours like a maximum of 20 people, and I wanted to run tours with experts. And I have a thing as well where I won't send anyone alone with a group. There's always a tour manager whose job it is to look after people, and then there's the person that does the history. And sometimes we flip on any given day, but I don't ever want one person to be solely responsible for an entire tour. So possibly the most successful thing we're doing at the moment, there's an outstanding British author called Stephen Fisher, who did a book about Sword Beach. And it was so methodical and so focused, laser focused, that he could literally pinpoint everything that happened on that one landing beach on D-Day. And his book went down really well over here, and he was a huge success at all of the festivals and the speaking engagements. So last year we took people to Sword Beach for a long weekend, and we just walked Sword Beach. So they walked the advance of different units. They followed specific people and their D-Day experience, just on that one hyper focused thing. And that's been, and we're doing Gold Beach as well next year. And then the casino tour, which I'm really excited about. We've partnered up with a local whose father actually was hiding in the Abbey when the Allied bombardment came. So it's hugely personal to him. And we were out there just a few weeks ago, kind of practicing hiking trails and seeing what we thought people would be capable of, and deciding which aspects of the battle we were going to follow and where we were going to take them. So we're really excited about that. So I think ours are for people that want to get really close to the history. I think a big overview introduction tour, we don't do very many of them. And probably my favorite one, and the tour that started all of this for me, was taking people to Jordan to follow in the footsteps of Lawrence of Arabia, which is a bit of a lie, because I take people there and then as soon as they get to the airport, I tell them, actually, we're not here for him. We'll talk about him, but he gets all the attention. And there's actually, the Arab story is hugely entertaining and full of really colourful characters. And there's also lots more British, and then the French are there. So we basically take people into the desert, and we walk in the desert for a couple of days, and we camp with the Bedouin, and we take them to Petra as well, because that's another thing that I do. Like I wouldn't want to take people to Jordan and then say, but it's a First World War tour, so you don't get to do Petra. If you're in Jordan, you want to see Petra. So we will take a day off and go and do that as well. So yeah, that one is hugely fun.
So if I sign up for the trip to Verdun, what's that going to cost me?
The Verdun trip, we are just waiting on some final costing for that. It's not going to be too much beyond what the tour last year. It's under $1,000.
But does that include hotels and all?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that includes the coach travel as well. That one, that's hard for me to cost right now. So for instance, the long weekend to Sword Beach is about £850. And that's to be in a small group with a recognised expert with a best-selling book, and to have that access. Yeah, I think that I'm taking 19 on that, and I won't have anyone else book on that one now. That one's sold out. The Verdun one, I still need some numbers to be able to give a final price on that one. So, yeah.
I want to go back to your book, and this is not easy to read, and you can correct my pronunciation of the names, but it's a woman by the name of Camille. Is it Fivet?
I think so, yeah.
Please excuse us for interrupting. We'll continue our conversation in a minute. And this is what she said. I heard a baby crying and asking for a drink. It was little Gilda Marchat, aged 2. A German immediately approached, put the barrel of his rifle in the child's mouth, and fired. Disgusted, I turned to the other side and saw a soldier carrying something at the end of his bayonet. I recognized the body of my little niece, Mariette Feve, who was 3 weeks old. After playing with this child's corpse, the soldier laid it on the ground, put his foot on its stomach to remove his bayonet. How much does that represent the kind of things that you found from individuals for your book?
In terms of the raw emotion,
but the brutality of the soldiers.
This is the thing. I think someone who reviewed our book said, I don't know why, but I kind of always thought that the first few weeks of the First World War were just everybody running around and it wasn't so bad before the really grim part kicked in with all the trenches. And they said that our book had obliterated that. And I think that's fair. We have quotes like that. We limited ourselves to about 10 that were really graphic like that because we didn't want it to be a relentless onslaught. If we used one unedited like that, it was because we felt it had to be in there and it had to convey the brutality. So that quote is from a chapter that Nikolai wrote, but from a source that I translated for him. And this is the worst day for Belgian civilians in the whole of the First World War. And it happens on the 23rd of August, 1914, which is the same day as the Battle of Mons, so the first British battle of the war. And the rape of Belgium is documented and it happened. And these kind of atrocities happened on multiple fronts in the opening weeks of the war. Then a propaganda campaign got layered on too, which tried to make it sound even worse. That quote we know is accurate because the Belgians, well, and especially the Belgians is in this area. So that took place in a town called Dinant, which we used that as an example because Dinant suffered the single biggest loss of civilian life. And it was well over 600 people on that one day, including, I think that might have happened up against the wall. So there was a wall where more than 100 people were lined up and shot. Mariette, I think, is the youngest at 3 weeks, but the eldest may have been more than 80, if not late 70s. So it was a huge span. And it represents the reality of what happened. And I think we've tried to think long and hard about why this happened. Do we think it's because German people are barbarians? No. But I think they had been indoctrinated to believe that every civilian they came across was out to get them. Because of franc-tireurs in the Franco-Prussian War, they had been drilled with this concept that you can't trust anyone. They will all try and kill you. Then you've got the fact that this German army that's invading is largely made up of reservists. So a lot of these guys, until a couple of weeks before that took place, were bakers or school teachers. And then they've been summoned into the army and they're not completely without military experience, but they've never been asked to invade another country and told everyone wants them dead. Add alcohol as well, because as they're rampaging through Belgium and France on their way towards Paris, they're looting alcohol, and then add exhaustion too. So there's a whole load of factors that kind of stack up to create this tinderbox. And the tragedy of Dinant is that it is this beautiful town on the River Meuse, and it has sheer cliff faces like on either side of it. And the Germans thought they heard civilians shooting at them from behind, but actually what they were hearing was the ricochet off the cliffs and the echo of their own shots. But in this scenario, they lost their minds and they killed more than 600 people. And there was originally a memorial that named everybody, and then in World War II, when Hitler's forces came through, it was destroyed. You find that, so Belgium has a whole collection of what are called martyr towns, and they're towns where stuff like this happened in the opening weeks of the war. And it happened in France too, and then it happened in the Balkans and in Russia, and both sides were guilty. It happened in East Prussia, and it was the Russians doing the killing. So this isn't this is Germany and Austria-Hungary, and they're monsters. There's evidence of it from multiple nations. But in terms of the Belgians in Dinant, what they did was for the centenary, they decided that they really needed to break down what was real and what was the latter propaganda effort, because obviously this gave Allied propaganda a huge well to draw from and stuff to make up. So you end up with stories that are fabricated, and you end up with rumors and things like, so that the worst is the German corpse factory, which is them melting down, like the idea that the Germans were cremating everybody and using the fat for soap and stuff like that. So they in Dinant, what they decided to do was find every account like that, and if there wasn't a grave to match, so if they couldn't find a grave for Mariette Fivet, then her name didn't go on the list of people who were killed. So they really diligently went out. So there was a couple of reasons why we picked it on. One was because they had done so much work on the ground to corroborate, and also because it represented the single biggest loss of life for Belgian civilians as well.
The next quote comes from a man that died in 1972, so I know who he was. A lot of Americans my age certainly will remember who he was. I must say I found it a surprise in your book, and that's Maurice Chevalier.
Yeah.
Who he's quoted as saying, "I was advancing heavily, too exhausted to tremble. We stumbled over stones and embankments. Under my stupefaction, a dull thought informed me that the war was beginning for me in exactly the same way that repelled me the most." I can go on, but where did you find the Maurice Chevalier quote?
Oh, I'm trying to think now. I think it's been quite well published in France. I would have translated it, but it's so interesting as well. So Dinant, that I was just talking about, just a few yards away from where that incident took place that you quoted, there's a statue of Charles de Gaulle, who was wounded in 1914 as a very junior officer. So there's a lot of famous people and later famous people doing the rounds in the First World War. But yeah, Chevalier, I have a feeling Chevalier was either wounded or taken prisoner and then didn't participate for much longer after that quote was taken. It's been a long time since I read the notes, but yeah, I have a feeling that his war was curtailed in some way. But yeah, he was certainly one of the men that was conscripted at the beginning of the war. The massive mobilization of forces in places like Russia and Germany and France. I mean, in Britain, we have these images of this rush to the colours and these 9-hour queues to get into the British Army. But that's a very uniquely British experience, because most of the other countries had already conscripted everybody and called reservists up and put everybody in uniform on the outbreak of war. Britain kind of proudly clung to not having conscription until 1916. But that was unique to Britain, because in the other countries there was no one left to go and recruit. Like I think in Belgium it says that the people running to try and recruit are either in their 60s or they're 14 or they're medically unfit and they don't want to go. So yeah, it's interesting.
Your next quote comes from a 22-year-old. I must say, surprised to find this name in World War I. Erwin Rommel.
Mm-hmm.
And you quote him saying, "The fog is clearing, the warm August sun is vividly lighting up the lovely hill landscape with its rich pastures, beautiful cornfields." He recalled of the farm in front of him. I could go on. It's in the book. Erwin Rommel. What did he do in World War I?
So in World War I, he was all over the place. In terms of the content of Ring of Fire, he was in Belgium. And what we're writing about is this attack on a farmhouse. And actually this year I went and found last year, sorry, this year, I'm getting confused. This year I took a group to the Ardennes and we went and found the farmhouse. It's still standing. And that was his first experience of combat. So we were quite keen to go and see where that had taken place. But actually, I've also retraced his footsteps across Italy as well. There's up on the Piave, it's where after Caporetto, if you've heard of Caporetto, it was this unique, massive disaster for the Italians, and they hugely retreated and they set up a new line on the River Piave. And there's a place there called Monte Tumba. And that's basically Rommel's Hill. So I've traced him there to another fight where he's come on a lot by that point, and seen much more combat. But yeah, he definitely was. He was definitely broken in the First World War. He saw multiple theatres and multiple engagements,
and ends up committing suicide.
Yeah. There's another one. So with him, I'm like, yeah, it's Owen Rommel. Everyone knows the name, and I don't really feel that angry about it. But if you recall the chapters about Liège and the fortresses, you talked about just a bog standard young subaltern called Kruger, whose father was killed 5 miles away, commanding a battalion. And Nikolai and I wrestled. We didn't do footnotes. We decided to do end notes because we didn't want to break the flow of the things. We just put all the notes at the back, and we did a big bibliography so people could source everything that we've been if they wanted to read further. And we really wanted a footnote for that guy, because I really wanted, because you read that and you're like, oh no, the poor guy, his father's just been killed and he's having a horrible day. No, that man, we Googled him, and it turns out that he was basically the architect of the final solution in Poland and an absolute monster. And again, killed himself before he could see any kind of justice in 1940. I think in 45 he killed himself. So we very much wrestled with having just one solitary footnote so that people didn't feel sorry for that man, but we didn't in the end. But yeah, both him and his brother ended up complete monsters.
As you do your work, what don't you like about being a historian? Anything?
The notes, the bit where you finish everything and then you have to go back and clarify where you found everything, because I can't be the only person. You start off and you're diligent and you source everything and it's all in the file, and then things get more stressed and you get the writing deadline looms closer and you just tapping away on your keyboard, and then there's the nightmare of having it sent back to you so that you can do the notes. But I think as well, like I said, so I have a friend who's finishing her book deadline is about now, and it's her first book. And I said, she said, oh, I just don't want to look at it. And I said, I'm going to tell you a secret from authors. And that is, if you don't hate the sight of your own book when you hand it in, you haven't been doing your job right, because you should have just had enough of it. You should have worked so hard. You should have left it all out there on the floor, and you should have nothing left to give. Unless you are like, just take it, I never want to see it again, then I don't feel like you've given it everything. So I said, it's completely normal to hate the sight of your own book.
So what would you recommend to somebody that's listening to this? Let's say, and I don't know how much you see young people being interested in history today, but if somebody says, I want to do what she's doing, or at least try, where do you start?
I think education is important. I think I did everything in spite of not having done the traditional university route, and not because I chose a different route. But I think it does prove that say you're in your 20s and you didn't get to go to college, it doesn't mean you can't do it. I think there are avenues out there. I'm running a course. It's just about sold out now, but I'm running a course in January for people who didn't go to college, or maybe went to college like 30 years ago, who just consume vast amounts of history books, but don't know what to do next. And it's just a simple 4-week course that takes you from being just an avid consumer to being the kind of person who can look at it and go, well, that source is rubbish. Why would you believe that? Because they say, like, but you said that guy didn't know what he was talking about. How did you know not to trust him? And so it's just a very simple course. And we're going to look at some controversies and some events that are hard to pick apart, and just guide people into kind of beginning to think like a historian for themselves. And the cross section of people that signed up, some people just are on a break in college or in a university course and just want to keep busy. Other people one day want to write something and don't know where to start. So it's interesting, but I do think there are avenues out there beyond just reading and just absorbing for it. And the Great War Group was literally designed for that. So our magazine, our shiny success story is one of the deputy editors now, Trevor, and he was a civil servant. He had never written anything 5 years ago. He started off by writing one of the little miniature obituaries we have in the magazine, which is 200 words. And then he did a slightly bigger piece, and then he did a bigger piece, and then he did one of our full features, which is like 5,000 words. And then he started editing with us as well. And now he basically heads up some of the content in the magazine. And that is what's available to you if you find, I think, the right interest group and the right people to help you develop. I don't think it has to be the traditional route. I think as well, when people say to me, oh, my daughter wants to be just like you, I say, tell her to just get a real job and do this after she retires, or do this in her spare time, because the hustle isn't easy. The people that I know that are managing to do it work very, very hard. Like, I work 70 hours a week, pretty much.
What was your family like?
Not particularly nurturing in an academic sense. Like I say, I have an uncle who's a journalist in Pakistan, and he's more academic. But on my mother's side, which is the side that is in Britain, I was the first one to go to university, so there wasn't sort of any outlet like that. But then I also think that at no point did my mum, she passed away in June, at no point did she tell me I was an idiot for choosing to do what I'd done either. Like, didn't matter that she couldn't empathize with being a writer and what it takes to research something, because I mean she was a clerical worker her entire career, but she never once questioned my sanity, which I think helps.
So what does the professional world, whatever that is, think of the way you're doing history?
I think it depends on who you are. There are people that they're academics and they like things the academic way, and they don't like the way that I perhaps dumb things down. I have always said there are multiple different ways to do history. And I have always said, for me personally, I would rather tell 100 people who have never read anything about the First World War something perceived as simple than write for 2 experts who already know everything. Like, that's just how I want to be. I want to talk to normal people about this stuff. I want to talk to people that don't spend their entire lives in universities, in archives, in academia, giving talks, writing academic textbooks. There are people that are really good at that. And that kind of forensic level is not me. And that kind of structure isn't me either. I like the idea of just being up to come up with the casino tour, just my latest harebrained scheme that I want to go and spend 5 days running about at Monte Cassino, around the Abbey and up the hills, and just really finding everywhere where all of these little things happen. And I have the freedom to do that and to share it with people, sort of a mixture of people now who will follow me on any harebrained scheme I come up with, and perhaps a few people that had relatives that served at casino as well, that want to be there and follow in their footsteps of their grandfathers. So I did a Normandy tour, and it was a Normandy tour for supporters of Chelsea Football Club, which sounds very random, but if you know that I am an avid follower of Chelsea Football Club, it actually is not so insane. And one of the chaps that came over, we did an introduction to the Normandy campaign. And we promised to get you to all 5 beaches, and then we promised to get them inland to see what happened next as well, and that we would go up to August 1944. And one of the guys that came had never been on a battlefield tour before, had never really researched anything. And it might have been the most rewarding tour experience of my life, because his father was with Maček in Normandy. And his father had always intended to take him and had never been able to. And I think at the point where we took Jacek who's from LA, we took him to a graveyard in a French village, and to a specific spot at the back, which is roughly where his father pulled someone out of a burning tank. That for me is the kind of experience I'm not really up. I would want to do that rather than lecture to a room full of academics. So that's how I choose to do it. And I think maybe some people do think it's a bit lightweight, but I'm okay with that.
We're about out of time, but before I ask you the last couple questions, if somebody wants to join this 4-week course, how do they find it?
It's on the website as well. It's alexchurchill.co.uk, and I've put a banner at the top. There's very few places left now. I might actually, if there's enough demand, I might just run it again, because I mean, I want it to be quite a small group. I don't want it to be a room of like 100 people, and I want people to have individual attention. So it's what I think I can manage. But judging by the response, which is to almost sell it out in less than a week, I think there's a lot of people out there who are very passionate about history and about learning, who were open to the idea of something like this, of making a step up from just being a reader.
I want to make sure that we have it right. alexchurchill.co.uk.
Yes.
Last couple questions. What's the overall numbers of World War I? How many people died?
It's really hard to gauge because you have to factor in things like the Armenian genocide, and then at the end of it, you start overlapping with the Spanish flu pandemic as well. But it runs into several million. And I think what's important as well is that as well as several million dead, you have to factor in the same number again of people who have been changed for life, whether it's mentally, whether it's, and especially like in France, they call them the mutiles. And actually the thing I like about the French is that when they had their victory parade in 1919 on the 14th of July through Paris, before the soldiers and before all of the pomp and the pageantry, came this ramshackle group of guys missing legs, helping each other along, being wheeled in chairs, and they were the guys that were broken and changed forever physically by the war. And I thought that was a really nice touch. So I think we have to factor in millions of dead on the battlefield. We have to factor in many more civilian deaths as well, with things like genocide and the pandemic. For instance, just again, and the global nature of it, pulling a country out of nowhere, 13% of adult men in Kenya died in the period of the First World War, whether it be from being, lots of Africans were sort of forced conscripted to be porters because there's no roads and no railways in most of Africa, so you had to carry everything. And then because that upends the whole economy across Africa, across equatorial Africa, then you have a famine because people aren't at home growing food like they should be. So yeah, that's just picking one East African nation and saying that very much this isn't just a European cost to the First World War, it is absolutely global.
I have a lot of other questions, but it's good to give you back your time. Again, the book is called Ring of Fire, but there's so much more about Alexandra Churchill, better known as Alex. Thank you very much for spending time with us.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for tuning into this week's Book Notes Plus podcast. If you have a moment, please consider rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to podcasts. Your feedback will help others discover the program. And don't forget to share this episode with friends and family. For the latest on new episodes, schedule updates, and more, follow us on X @C-SPAN Radio.